Okay, so when you think of Pride and Prejudice, what comes to mind? Probably Colin Firth in a wet shirt, right? Or Keira Knightley staring across the misty field. But today, we're going to look past all the romance and the drama to uncover the story that Jane Austen was really telling. A story about money, law, and straight-up social survival.
Ah, yes. One of the most famous first lines in all of literature. You know the one. It perfectly sets up this world that's just obsessed with marriage and money. And for more than 200 years, that's exactly how we've read this story, as the ultimate rom-com, the gold standard for two stubborn people falling in love against all odds.
But what if that's not the whole story? Not even close. What if, when you strip away the beautiful dresses and the witty one-liners, what you're left with is a brutal, high-stakes game? A game where a woman's entire future, her actual survival, didn't depend on finding a soulmate, but on locking down a husband with a big bank account. This wasn't just romance. For a lot of women, it was a matter of life and death.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll dig into that famous opening line to see just how harsh the Regency marriage market really was. Then we'll get into how Austen basically rewrote the rules for what a novel could be. After that, we're going to re-examine the plot through this whole new lens of property and social pressure. And finally, we'll see how this sharp, witty book became the global phenomenon it is today.
All right, let's start with the world the Bennet sisters actually had to navigate. They were part of the gentry, that class of landowners just a notch below the super-rich aristocracy. And for women in that world, life was incredibly fragile. They were taught to be refined, to play music, to be charming, but they had basically zero respectable ways to earn their own money. Their entire future depended on one thing and one thing only: making a good marriage.
Now, at the very heart of the Bennet family's desperation is one single legal term: entailment. It sounds complicated, but it's pretty simple and brutal. This very real law meant that their family home, Longbourn, could not be passed down to any of the 5 daughters. The second Mr. Bennet died, the whole estate would go to the closest male relative, who happens to be the awful Mr. Collins. This would leave all the Bennet women, including their mom, completely homeless. This isn't just a plot point. It was a real legal trap for so many women.
To really get the stakes here, you have to follow the money. And Jane Austen, who is actually a banker's daughter, is super specific about the numbers. When Mr. Bingley moves in next door, the whole neighborhood is buzzing because he makes £5,000 a year. Now, to put that in perspective, a decent middle-class income back then was maybe £400 a year. Bingley was making more than 10 times that. This wasn't just a number, it was a flashing neon sign of power, stability, and opportunity. And now, for the flip side. Look at Elizabeth Bennet. Her entire inheritance is £1,000. If she invested that, she'd get about £40 a year. Let that sink in. £40 a year versus Bingley's $5,000. That's the massive gap she and her sisters needed to cross. And in their world, the only bridge across that gap was marriage. It wasn't about marrying up for luxury. It was about marrying to survive. And this money wasn't just sitting in a bank somewhere. It translated directly into your social status in very obvious ways. £100 a year, that puts you on the absolute bottom rung of the genteel class, barely enough to have a single servant. As you climbed the ladder, a big deal was getting a carriage, a public sign that you were important enough not to walk. And at the very top, the ultimate flex was a house in town, a place in London for the high society season. These weren't just perks, they were billboards advertising your rank.
This whole harsh reality is summed up perfectly by Elizabeth's pragmatic friend Charlotte Lucas. When she agrees to marry the totally insufferable Mr. Collins, it's not for love, no way. It's based on cold, hard logic. She's 27, she doesn't have a big fortune, and her options are disappearing fast. As she puts it, marriage is her preservative from want, her best protection against poverty. For her, it was a career move, plain and simple.
Okay, so given this incredibly tough world, what Jane Austen did as a writer is even more amazing. She wasn't just writing about her society, she was completely revolutionizing the novel itself. Before Austen, the literary scene was, well, it was different. She took all the popular genres of her day and just flipped the script, creating something that was sharp, witty, and felt shockingly real. I mean, think about what novels were like before her. A lot of them were either these long, slow-moving books about big moral ideas, or they were completely over-the-top melodramas with kidnappings and fainting heroines. And then in comes Austen. She sweeps all that away and gives us this fast, sparkling dialogue. She gives us heroines like Elizabeth Bennet, who are smart and funny, but also flawed. They make mistakes. And she finds drama in the little things: a dinner party, a letter, a walk in the countryside. Honestly, Austen was a master of parody, and she used popular fiction as her own personal playground. You had these super emotional, sentimental novels. She constantly made fun of them. Gothic fiction, with all its spooky castles and damsels in distress, she totally satirized it, especially in Northanger Abbey. Those strict conduct books telling women exactly how to behave, she questioned them at every turn. She was basically in conversation with everything being written at the time, and she was always a step ahead.
All right, so now that we have all that context, the money, the laws, the literary scene, let's go back and look at the plot of Pride and Prejudice again. Because it's not just a series of misconnections and romantic moments, it's a masterful story about negotiation, strategy, and crisis management, all happening inside a society totally obsessed with property and status.
The plot really unfolds in 4 stages, and they're all driven by economics. First, you have the arrival of Bingley and Darcy. That's an economic event that kicks open the marriage market. Second, the proposals start flying, and they're often treated like business deals. Third, you get the crisis. Lydia running off with Wickham isn't just a scandal, it's a potential financial apocalypse that could make all her sisters unmarriable. And finally, the resolution isn't just about love, it's about 2 key mergers that secure the entire family's future. And if you want the perfect example of this, look no further than Mr. Collins's proposal to Elizabeth. It is so cringeworthy. He doesn't talk about love or connection. He literally lays out his reasons like he's at a business meeting. Number 1, it's good for his career. Number 2, he thinks it'll make him happy. And number 3, and this is the big one, his boss, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, told him to. Love? It doesn't even make the list. And then you get Elizabeth's response, which is just iconic. In a world where her best friend is making the smart play by accepting this guy for security, Elizabeth just shuts it down. And her reason? You could not make me happy. She puts her own personal happiness and self-respect on the table as non-negotiable. For her time, that was a truly radical act. Of course, we can't forget about Darcy's first proposal, which is a train wreck in its own very special way. It might just be the worst marriage proposal in literary history. He tells her he loves her, but in the same breath, he insults her family, her social standing, and basically says it's beneath him to even be asking. His pride is a direct product of his wealth and his class, and it's just as big a barrier as Mr. Collins's cold, calculating logic. So that brings us to the big question, right? How did this novel, which is so deeply, deeply rooted in the specific anxieties of Regency England, become this timeless global phenomenon? How does this sharp critique of the marriage market somehow become the blueprint for the modern rom-com? Let's trace how it went from a popular book to a total cultural icon.
Well, it didn't happen overnight. After its initial success, a big step was in 1833, when it was reprinted in an affordable series that got it into the hands of a lot more middle-class readers. Then in 1870, her nephew wrote a memoir that kind of softened her image into this sweet, quiet Aunt Jane, which the Victorians loved. By the 1940s, you start seeing the first official fan clubs. And then 1995 happened. The BBC adaptation came out and boom, global Austen mania was ignited. And it really hasn't stopped since.
And today, the legacy is just staggering. There are hundreds of movie and TV versions. There are incredible modern retellings set in Pakistan or in Muslim communities in Canada. There's a huge online fan fiction world. There's an entire industry of tourism with people making pilgrimages to the places she lived. Her story has been adapted and reimagined in pretty much every corner of the world. It's wild. And that really gets to the heart of why it lasts. Because while the details might be history, the core struggles are not. We all still have to navigate complicated social hierarchies. We still wrestle with judging people based on a first impression or how much money they have. And most of all, we still root like crazy for someone who's trying to find their own way and be their own person in a world that's full of expectations. Which leaves us with one final thought to chew on. Austen created this world that's full of rigid rules, social traps, and economic dead ends. And yet, for over 200 years, readers have found Elizabeth Bennet's journey through that world to be profoundly freeing. So the question is, why is that? Why do these stories about being trapped by society's rules still feel so incredibly liberating to us today?